Have you ever saved for years only to feel like you've gotten nowhere? You're not alone. Most new investors face this frustrating treading water phase where months, even years of effort barely move the numbers forward. It can feel painfully slow, almost like you're running on a treadmill with no progress in sight. But here's the truth. That slow start isn't a mistake. It's the groundwork for future acceleration. There's a simple rule that shows exactly when the pace changes, and once you understand it, your entire perspective on growth shifts. So why does it feel so slow at first? In the beginning, most investors are caught off guard by how little their balance seems to grow, no matter how disciplined they've been. You make deposits month after month. You stay consistent, and yet the outcome feels almost invisible. That's exactly what Harry went through. After 2 full years of steady savings, he checked his balance and saw only $1,200. For him, this was a hard pill to swallow. All those sacrifices, all the skipped purchases, all the discipline. Yet, the result looked like it could barely cover a few small expenses. In that moment, he began to question whether building wealth through investing was realistic for someone like him, or if it was only reserved for people who already had large amounts of money to start with. This frustration is far more common than most people realize. The reason it feels discouraging is because we expect growth to be simple and linear, like climbing a staircase where every step is the same size. But in reality, compounding works differently. It's more like climbing a staircase where each step ahead grows taller than the last. At first, the steps are almost flat. You hardly notice them. But as time passes, they become dramatically larger. Harry's $1,200 felt laughably small compared to the financial milestones he saw others celebrating online. It was like pouring drops into a gigantic swimming pool. You might see ripples for a second, but the water level barely seems to rise at all. Here's why this happens. During the early years, your account grows mainly from what you contribute, not from the returns on those contributions. Compounding doesn't fail you in the beginning. It just hasn't had the time to show its real power. Think of it like building the foundation for a house. You can spend months digging, pouring concrete, and setting rebar. Yet, at the end of all that labor, you don't see anything glamorous rising above the ground. But without that hidden groundwork, the house would never stand. Investing follows the same principle. Those first deposits are the invisible foundation the rest of your wealth is built upon. Now, let's make this more concrete with numbers. Suppose you commit to contributing $500 each month and your investments achieve an average 10% annual return. After the first year, your account balance would be about $6,330. That feels like progress compared to where you started, but it's still far from life-changing and nowhere near the get-rich stories we often hear. At this stage, most of the $6,330 is still your own money. The returns haven't yet swelled into anything noticeable. And that's exactly what makes early investing feel like treading water. You're moving, but it doesn't look or feel like you're getting anywhere. This is where many people stumble, mistaking slow beginnings for failure. Watching the balance inch forward can be demotivating, and it's easy to question whether the system works at all. But here's the critical shift in perspective. Those early, unimpressive balances are not a sign that compounding isn't working. They're proof you're building the structure compounding needs in order to thrive later. Just like treading water keeps you afloat long enough to actually start moving forward. These contributions keep your balance alive and growing until the real acceleration can kick in. This phase is necessary. It strengthens the base, piles up the contributions, and creates the weight that compounding can later grab onto. What feels like stagnation is actually preparation. Many investors quit here, not realizing that they're standing on the very edge of a turning point because there is a shift. At some point, the slow crawl gives way to acceleration and the difference is dramatic. That moment might not be obvious when you're in it, but the math guarantees it's there. And this raises the natural question. If these early years are about putting in the work without seeing much progress, when does the shift happen? Is there a way to know when your money will stop feeling sluggish and start building real momentum? It turns out there is. And the answer lies in a clear pattern that has guided investors for decades. That's where the hidden acceleration pattern comes in, the 8-4-3 rule. At first glance, it looks like a simple timeline, but what it really describes is the turning point where persistence finally pays off. The idea is simple. If you invest $625 every month and your portfolio grows at an average 10% annual return, it takes about 8 years to reach the first $100,000. That's stage 1. Then the acceleration begins. The next $100,000 doesn't take 8 more years, but only 4. And the third one arrives even faster, around 3 years. What once felt like endless grinding suddenly shifts into rapid progress. Think about why this matters. Most people give up during those first 8 years because the results don't look dramatic. The balance creeps forward. The doubts start to take over. They assume they're doing something wrong, or worse, that building wealth is only realistic for people who started with large amounts of money. But the problem isn't the system, it's our expectations. Compounding is slow at first because the contributions bear most of the load. The returns may be real, but they're small compared to what you're putting in. The 8-4-3 rule shows exactly when that imbalance flips and when compounding takes the driver's seat. Harry's experience makes this clear. When he first encountered the 843 framework, it shifted his whole perspective. The frustration he felt about only saving a few thousand gave way to recognition that he was actually right on schedule. What looked like failure was really stage 1 on the map. Suddenly, instead of staring at his stagnant balance, he could see the timeline stretching forward. And for the first time, he knew when progress would speed up. That mental shift was powerful. Instead of asking whether investing even worked, he started asking how much faster he could move through the gears. A useful way to picture this is by imagining a car's gearbox. When the engine is in first gear, you hear the effort and feel the strain, but the car barely moves. Once you shift into higher gears, the same amount of effort powers you forward far more efficiently. Investing follows the same pattern. In the beginning, you're in that low gear, working hard, seeing little change. But the moment you hit that first $100,000 milestone, the gears shift, and suddenly growth starts happening at a pace you once thought impossible. Here's the part that surprises almost everyone. The hardest milestone is the first one. Hitting that first $100,000 is the longest stretch. 8 years of steady contributions at $625 per month with a 10% return. It feels slow, even discouraging, but that's the point at which most people tap out. And yet, it's also the most important stage because once you're there, everything else accelerates. The second $100,000 comes in about 4 years without you doing anything different. That leap is the moment where most investors realize just how powerful compounding actually is. Then in just 3 years, the third milestone is reached. The pattern doesn't stop there. It continues to scale, moving you forward faster and faster. The key lesson isn't about having a massive paycheck or striking it rich quickly. It's about staying consistent long enough to move from stage 1 into the stages where growth builds on itself. At that point, you're no longer dragging your account forward. It's pulling itself ahead. And this is where the story gets exciting. The early years may feel like a grind, but when momentum flips, the experience changes completely. The same deposits you've always made suddenly look like they're multiplying themselves, and the wait that once felt endless begins to pay off in ways you can see and feel. That's the real power of the 8-4-3 shift, and it sets the stage for what happens next. When those years of frustration transform into a snowball of visible growth, when momentum begins compounding on itself, the the entire experience changes. What started as a slow grind transforms into something that feels more like a wealth snowball, picking up size and speed as it rolls forward. This is exactly what the 8-4-3 sequence illustrates in practice. With steady contributions of $625 per month at a 10% return, that first $100,000 requires about 8 years of patience. But once it's in place, the timeline compresses. The next $100,000 arrives in only 4 years, and the third in just 3. The grind of the early years gives way to acceleration that moves faster than most people expect. This shift often surprises investors who nearly gave up during the early stretch. In the beginning, your balance is mainly made up of your own deposits. Adding money every month is doing almost all of the heavy lifting. But as time passes, the math starts to bend in your favor. The compounding effect takes over more and more of the load until eventually it becomes the primary driver. That's when watching your account go up starts to feel entirely different. Instead of questioning whether investing is even working, you find yourself curious to check in just to see how much the number has climbed since last month. To see this in action, take someone who contributes $625 every month at that same 10% annual return. For the first several years, the balance feels like it's crawling, inching towards 6 figures. But once the first $100,000 line is crossed, the gears shift. Instead of another long 8 years of work, the next $100,000 builds in roughly half the time, and the third milestone arrives faster still. The snowball has grown large enough that compounding is finally doing the majority of the work. What initially felt discouraging becomes motivating because the results are visible and arrive faster than before. Small adjustments can make this process even more powerful. Consider increasing monthly contributions by just a little bit. Adding an extra $400 per month, perhaps from a side hustle or freelance work, has an enormous long-term impact. At a 10% return over 30 years, that extra $400 per month doesn't just add a bit of cushion. It compounds into an additional $868,599. This is the kind of difference that changes long-term outcomes. And it comes not from massive sacrifices, but from small, consistent additions layered onto the base you're already building. Think about what this means in practical terms. One extra shift per week, whether driving for a ride share, working retail hours, or picking up a freelance gig, might not feel like a game changer in the moment, but applied consistently and invested wisely, that small effort accelerates the point where compounding carries the balance forward on its own. The additional contributions give the snowball more weight earlier, which helps it roll faster and grow larger with less input from you over time. The key realization comes when returns from the existing balance begin to outweigh the contributions you add each month. That's the tipping point when your money officially works harder than you do. What used to feel like a burden, seeing slow growth for years, turns into excitement when the balance grows by thousands in a single year, even if you don't change a thing about your deposits. For Harry, this was a breakthrough moment. Instead of frustration, he started seeing progress as inevitable because the snowball had become self-sustaining. Time is what powers this transformation. The discipline of sticking through the slower years sets up the acceleration, and consistency allows compound growth to dominate over personal effort. It's the difference between carrying progress on your back and being pushed forward by momentum. But while compounding is a remarkable force on its own, there's another factor that can amplify it even more, making sure that growth isn't quietly eroded along the way. And that's where the strategy becomes just as important as effort. What if there were a way to make compounding work harder for you without adding any extra money to your monthly deposits? Most people assume that higher growth requires saving more, picking up side income, or cutting back on spending. But there's another factor that quietly changes how fast your money grows. It doesn't require sacrifice, just a smarter approach to protecting the returns you're already earning. That factor is taxes. Here's the issue. When you invest through a taxable account, a portion of your gains gets shaved off every year. Each time those gains are realized, taxes step in and take their share before compounding can do its job. Over a short time, that effect isn't always obvious. But stretched over decades, the drag is significant. Instead of building momentum, your account ends up trailing behind where it could have been. For investors who stay consistent, this small leak adds up to hundreds of thousands of dollars lost. Not because they picked up the wrong investments, but because of the type of account they used. Take a look at the difference in numbers. Imagine earning an average 10% return each year inside a tax-advantaged account, like a Roth IRA or 401k. Because those accounts allow your returns to grow tax-free or tax-deferred, compounding rolls forward uninterrupted year after year. Now compare that to keeping the exact same investments in a taxable brokerage account. Once you account for the drag of taxes at average rates, that 10% effectively slips down to about 7.8%. At first glance, 10 versus 7.8 might not seem like a game-changing difference. But across decades, that small gap creates a massive divide in outcomes. Let's break it down with a concrete example. Suppose you invest $500 every month for 30 years. In a tax-sheltered account earning 10%, your balance grows to $185,636. But place those same contributions into a taxable account at the reduced effective rate, and you end up with over $400,000 less. That loss isn't a minor inconvenience. It's the direct cost of compounding with a leak built into your bucket. You didn't save less. You didn't earn weaker returns. You simply lost growth because taxes pulled a share away before your gains could compound again. Harry came to realize this after noticing the difference between his taxable investments and his Roth IRA. His early balances weren't just slow because of the natural grind in the first years. They were also being chipped away by taxes. After moving his contributions into his Roth, the curve began to bend upward faster. Nothing about the performance of investments suddenly improved. The change came entirely from keeping every dollar of his growth sheltered inside the account. Instead of watching his snowball lose pieces along the way, he finally let it roll intact. Think about it like filling a bucket with water. If the bottom has a leak, you may be pouring in more, but the level barely rises. That's how investing through a taxable account feels over time. Seal the leak, though, and suddenly every drop you add builds on itself. The exact same effort now produces a noticeably higher result, not because you worked harder, but because you are no longer wasting what you already earned. And this lesson works no matter when you begin. Protecting your gains from taxes isn't something that only benefits 20-somethings with decades ahead. Even if you start later in life, each dollar placed in a tax-advantaged account compounds faster than it would outside of one. The timeline may be shorter, but the effect remains powerful. This is why tax protection is such a critical part of long-term strategy. Compounding doesn't just reward consistency, it rewards placement. Choosing an account that shields your returns creates the same effect as earning a higher rate of return without putting in any additional work. Those who pay attention to this see their balances grow more efficiently, while those who ignore it unknowingly leave years of progress behind. In the end, the most powerful part of this isn't that it makes you rich overnight, but that it allows compounding to do what it was designed to do, build on itself without interruption. The question isn't whether you'll experience slow beginnings, because everyone does. The real question is whether you'll position yourself so that acceleration becomes as strong as possible once it arrives. The slow beginning isn't failure. It's the groundwork compounding needs before acceleration can happen. Those early deposits, even when they feel small, are what make later growth possible. That's why the 8-4-3 rule matters. It gives a clear timeline showing when persistence turns into momentum. But here's the key. Waiting comes at a real cost. Skipping just one $500 contribution today doesn't cost you only $500. At a 10% return over 30 years, that single missed deposit would have grown to $8,725. Every delay leaves that growth behind. So what should you do? Follow the steps Harry used to finally gain traction. First, calculate your freedom number, the balance you need to support your goals. Next, open an investment account. Choose a simple index fund and commit to regular contributions. Write down today's date and record your starting balance as a visible reminder of your starting line. So if you're building a business, investing your income, or shaping your financial future, remember this. You don't need to be extraordinary this year. You need to be consistent for many years. Long-term thinking turns ordinary actions into extraordinary results. If this perspective helped you think differently about money, business, and investing, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We put a lot of effort into creating content that helps you build clarity, discipline, and long-term financial confidence. And subscribing truly supports us in delivering more insights like this. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. Our future videos will continue guiding you towards smarter decisions and lasting financial freedom.